Hey, yo, it's Jay. Welcome to Recovered by Christ. And I want to talk to you today about getting your life out from under the umbrella of money. Let's talk about what it means to be wealthy. If you were to ask yourself, how do I define wealth? What would you say? Like, how would you define wealth? Would you define wealth to the same calibration that someone like Donald Trump would, or Jeff Bezos, or Elon Musk? Or would you define wealth a little differently? I can tell you one thing. You will define wealth differently than I will. And that's what makes this subject so challenging is everyone is measuring wealth differently. Some people measure it in the Gucci and the Prada. Some people measure it in the new cars and the upgraded phones every cycle. Some people measure it in the zeros on the end of your bank statement. Some people measure it in the income on your tax bracket. Some people measure it in portfolios. You want to know how I measure it? I sat down with my wife and I looked her in the eyes and I said, I want to establish a definition of wealth. And she said, okay, I think this can be good. And I said, this is how I define wealth. The ability to live my life, making decisions, establishing goals, pursuing goals, accomplishing the feats that I want to accomplish in my life without money telling me yes or no. And my wife was like, I love that. I'm on board with that. And so now I can live in a season, and this is real stuff, man. I can live in a season where I am making a third of the income that I was making a year ago today. And I'm living wealthier now than I was then. It doesn't mean I'm making more money. I mean, I steward my money well. So I'm ultimately going to say that I have more in my savings than I had at this point last year. But in the same breath, I spend a lot less money on my day-to-day life, and I am not materialistically driven. I don't buy myself a whole lot. We're not going on vacations every other week trying to feel like we're out and about doing life. Like, we're being a family, and we're doing things with our son and with each other that help us enrich our life, that help us experience relationship, help us experience God and nature, and help us grow and cultivate like a faithfulness to God in our lives. And as we do that, we go to bed feeling like we're more blessed than we felt a year ago today. And a year ago today, everything was honestly, you would have looked on paper and been like, you're blessed, bro. I was making the most money I had ever made. I lived 10 minutes from my family. I literally, my wife was put up. She didn't have to work or nothing. You know, everything was where you would want it to be. But I would go to bed so stressed and striving for more. And I think that's the core of what Paul's talking about in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10, when he says, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It's when you love the money, when you love the outcome of the money, that you actually are falling into the roots of evil. And I think you can actually see that because when you understand the stewardship principle that Jesus teaches in Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30, he doesn't talk about anybody getting rich. He doesn't talk about how the rich man used his money or how the poor man used his money. He talks about three servants who were given the same amount of income, but they all stewarded him very differently. One just buried it and said, I'm not going to do anything with it, and literally lived without. And that servant was actually called wicked. Another one was kind of like half in. They're like, I'm going to invest a little and I'm going to sit on a little. And then one guy was like, dude, I'm just going to go all in. Like, it's not mine. I'm going to just steward the money well. I'm going to put it in a place where I know that it's going to do what money's supposed to do, which is grow, not go. And then when he comes, I'll give it back to him. That's the wealthy mentality. None of them. And then what happens is he actually gets a double up. And what's crazy is Jesus looks at, in this parable, he looks at the guy who buried his money and he says, man, you're wicked. And then he says, I'm going to take all of yours and give it to the guy who went all in. And so what does all in on wealth look like if it's not the love of money? Stewardship. Take what you have, no matter how little or how much, and use it in a way that glorifies God. And let me start by just cutting the root of materialism out, because God talks about, or excuse me, Jesus, which is God, so that's fair to say. But Jesus talks in Matthew chapter 6, verses like 25 through 34, about not worrying about your clothes, not worrying about the this, that, and the other. And he actually says pagans worry about those things. But like God provides for the birds every winter and they don't store up food. God makes these flowers out front so beautiful and they die tomorrow. Like, don't you think God's going to take care of you? And really what he's talking about here is this rest in the provision God's given you. And when you marry that with the stewardship principle, what you learn to do is actually approach your life with this level of contentment that Paul preaches in Philippians chapter 4, verses like 10 through 13. And what Paul says is, I've got this thing that I've learned, whether I have a little or have a lot, whether I'm hungry or whether I'm full, whether I'm in a bed or camping, whether I'm in prison or at home, the secret is that Christ is in me and I can do all things through him. When you really grab that, money quits mattering. Excuse me. And as the money quits mattering, you can start to realize that it's all, the mentality of wealth is all about where you're rooted. And if you're rooted in Christ and you're truly saying, wealth to me is in the experience, and I attain that by stewarding what I've been given, I'm a wealthy dude. And I'm not saying this to sell you the poverty gospel, but I'm also not going to sell you the prosperity gospel. I'm going to sell you the Christ-dependent gospel. And that's the reality. You should live in the Christ-dependent gospel. He's going to provide for me, and whatever he provides, I'm going to steward that, and I'm not going to fall in love with what he provides. I'm just going to be content with what he's provided. And in that is the attainability of wealth, if you ask me. And I find that in every season, I'm able to do the things that mean the most to me. Like in this season, my son's able to walk and do all these things. So like hiking, going to the lake, riding bikes, playing in the dirt, like those are the things he's into. My wife is tired of being cooped up all winter, so she wants to get out. She wants to do biking. We want to try to get healthier with our body. She wants to explore nature more. So we do that. And so what you find is we're at work during the week and we have dinner together outside. We ride our bikes down to the lake, or we walk to a hiking trail or whatever. The hiking trail is a little far to walk to, but nevertheless, my point is we go to bed feeling wealthy and we make less money than we did at this time last year. And there's something to that. And I feel like I'm tapping into a kind of like a spiritual secret here. When your version of wealth is rooted in money, it's a fleshly driven process and it's always going to consume, and materialism is a measurement. When your view of wealth has a spiritual root, it doesn't matter what I have, I live and feel wealthy. And you see that in me. When it's time to spend money or when it's time to tithe or low money, I don't even have a second thought. I'm just like, all right, that's what we do with that. And then the next day, I still do the exact same thing I would have done whether I had the money or not. And I'm not in debt, so I'm not like stressing that. I did the Dave Ramsey and got out of debt, and now we live on a good cycle. If you wanted to know how I can bridge my program into what I'm telling you today, it's actually 3 ways. Step 3, which is we gave our lives and will over to the care of God as we understand him. I gave my life and will to God. I don't measure it by the world's standards anymore. I don't measure my wealth in terms of vehicles or materials or jewelry or how many trips I can take and how far away from home they are. I measure wealth based on the ability to experience God and others in a full and fulfilling way. And I do that regularly. And I have nice things while I do it because God can see that I'm not attached to the things. I'm attached to the relationships. Step 11, we continue to seek conscious contact with God, seeking his will and the power to carry that out. I'm doing that every day. I'm like, God, what is your will today? And his will is not for me to love money. 1 Timothy 6:10, right? His will is that I would love him and put him before in all things. And so I do that. And then he gives me the power to do that. And then I enjoy things that don't depend on money as though I had paid a lot of money to acquire them. I could spend hundreds of dollars going to a theme park or on a vacation, and I will probably have as much fun as driving across the state and hanging out with my family for the weekend. And that's what I do. I don't go blow all this money. I go spend time in the relationships, and God provides. And I always have enough, and I'm always happy, and I'm always fulfilled. And money never tells me no. That's wealthy to me. And step 12, we practice these principles in all our affairs. I've learned to depend on God's way in step 3. I've learned to seek his will and his power to acquire his way in step 11. And then I practice that in everything. My stewardship, my contentment with life. I have what I need, and he will bless me with what he wants to bless me with. And so if you wanted to ask, where are you trying to land this conversation today? I'm trying to land it in this. Wealth is a mentality. It's not a number. It's not something you can quantify. It's something you exemplify. Quantify means measure. Wealth isn't something you can measure. It's something that you can experience. And you experience it through God. And then the blessings can come around it. I wanted to talk about this today because our economy is going bonkers right now. Genuinely. Gas prices are going up. Everybody's tripping out about this war and what's going on. I mean, I've seen inflation in my lifetime at a rate that's genuinely frustrating. If we let those things decide what wealth looks like, we're never going to be wealthy, and we'll always be chasing it, and we will have the love for money. But if you can step back and say, I'm out of that rat race, this is what wealth is to me. A happy wife, a happy son, doing things I enjoy every day. And when I want to do something, I don't have money sitting there saying, go in debt or go broke or don't do it. I can say, I'm not going in debt. I'm not going to go broke, and I'm going to go do that. And that's wealthy to me. And trust me, if you saw my bank account, you would chuckle. You would chuckle at how much money I make. I chuckle at how much money I make compared to what I was making even a year ago. And I don't even apply pressure to my employer. I'm like, hey, we're good, dude. I love my job. I'm wealthy because I enjoy my work. I show up with a smile every single day. And my family's provided for. And that is a wealthy mentality that I want you to have. And when you have that, I will know that your perception of wealth has been recovered by Christ. Be blessed.